I watched the Republican debate last night, and it was about 3 hours long, and I watched another hour of the commentary following the debate, what the pundits had to say, and it seems that there's a consensus that Carly Fiorina won the thing. She was forceful and determined in what she was saying and confident in what she's saying, so they labeled her the winner. Everybody seemed to attack not everybody, but it was clear that Jay Tapper or Topper or whatever his name is, the moderator there, had an agenda to see if he could set the dogs on Donald Trump. How you feel that Donald responded to that really depends on if you supported him before. I think his supporters are still his supporters, and his distractors are still his distractors, and the rest of us are like, oh. But the one thing I took away last night, I was listening to everybody's foreign policy take, and everybody wanted to project this thing of toughness, that they are tough and that the guy in the White House now is weak, that we are somehow not safe over here because President Obama is in office, and unless we elect one of these guys, we won't be safe again. Even though the criteria, from what I understand, from what they say about President Obama's predecessor, George W. Bush, that the criteria for whether or not we're safe is if a terrorist attack has happened on American soil, which it has not. Of course, they're blaming the President Obama for the volatility over in the Middle East, the rise of ISIS, despite the fact that the Middle East is really now what the Middle East has always been, volatile. If you recall, well, you might not recall, but back in 1983, over in Beirut, Lebanon, 263 of our Marines were killed under President Reagan's watch. And you know that President Reagan is, according to Republicans or conservatives, a god. So under the God's watch, the Middle East was volatile, and you go back even before Reagan, volatile, and obviously since Reagan, volatile. You can make an argument that it became more volatile with the fall of Saddam Hussein. I'm not going to chew my cabbage twice on that, but I will say you can blame President Obama about the rise of ISIS all you want, but if it hadn't have been ISIS, it was going to be somebody, because there's always somebody when it comes to the Middle East. That's just a fact of life. But before I continue along that path, let's take a listen to Christie.
To them. And I support what President Bush did at that time, going into Afghanistan, hunting al-Qaeda and its leaders, getting its sanctuary out of place, and making it as difficult around the world for them to move people and money. And then he went to prosecutors like us, and he said, never again. Don't prosecute these people after the crime is committed. Intervene before the crime happens. I absolutely believe that what the president did at the time was right, and I am proud to have been one of the people on the stage who was part of making sure that what Governor Bush said before was the truth. America was safe for those 7 years, and Barack Obama has taken that safety away from us.
Dr. Carson.
Well, now that's what's scary. That's the Bush doctrine, the preemptive strike. And in order to do a preemptive strike, you need intelligence. Before you find out what somebody is intending to do, you need intelligence. And if you recall, the reason the Bush administration said that they were so wrong about whether or not Iraq had WMDs before launching an attack was that the intelligence was faulty. Now, I'm not going to play Mike Huckabee's comment last night about being in the Oval Office and not knowing what you don't know when people are talking to you. So maybe when President Bush got the report, he didn't know what he didn't know, but that's another story. Point is, if you have to rely on intelligence before you strike somebody, before they actually do something, Bush has shown that that might not be the wisest thing to do. The preemptive strike, I'm just not a big fan of that. Again, that's the Bush doctrine, and Governor Christie is doubling down on that. Now, understand that Christie is way behind in the polls, and he has to do something to jumpstart his numbers. So, attaching himself to the man who appointed him, U.S. Federal prosecutor, it appears in his eyes seems to be the way to go. But again, the American people are going to make this determination in due time. But it's going to come down to this, whether or not you feel as an American, as a voter, that the country was safer, the country was on a better path when Bush was in office versus when the last 6 years, and at the time of the polls, it'd be the last 8 years when President Obama was in office. And if you truly feel one way or the other, that's how you're going to vote. And it is quite simple. And it has to be, you have to use your mind and you have to use your common sense. And it can't be solely based off of what the candidates say. And particularly some of the candidates I've heard last night, because to me, and look, it might be just me, but if you can look in the camera and honestly say that the country was better off when Bush was in office versus these last 6.5 years that Obama was in office, if you can honestly say that, then I question your motivation. Now, you can not like President Obama. You can not like being a Democrat. You can not like liberal policies. I'm not saying that you can't do that. You can be a conservative and not like those things, but you can't, in my mind, say with all honesty that what happened on Bush watch was better than what happened on President Obama's watch. You know, the facts just not going to bear that all, you know. And so I say that to say one of my main problems with some of these conservative candidates is rely on conservative principles. One of the things I see with the candidates is they have to say that Obama was the worst ever. They have to say that right now the country is a disaster. They have to say that the Middle East is a disaster when it's always a disaster. But they have to say that it's a disaster because it's Obama's fault. They feel they have to say these things instead of just laying down on or putting their faith in conservative principles. It's like you don't really believe in your principles so much unless you have to demonize the other side. And to me, that represents a problem. As a voter, I would consider a conservative who honestly said, and Trump came the closest last night, and you can see on social media they were about slamming him for doing it, but he came out and said what was true. George W. Bush was a disaster. Point blank. And the fact that he was a disaster, look, I voted for Barack Obama, and I'm a center-left guy. I would have voted for the Democratic nominee anyway. But I have to admit, George W. Bush made it that much easier. And if you're a conservative candidate and you can't admit that, but yet you can open up your mouth and say that Barack Obama was the worst president ever, then again, I question your sanity. And therefore, I will question if you were ready or not to lead this great nation.